Just before we get to our terrific speakers this afternoon, I just wanted to offer a couple words of framing. Rio's a really big deal. What's coming up this summer is an opportunity for tens of thousands of government officials, civil society activists, people thinking very hard about questions about the interrelationship between the environment, economic growth, and development to come together and really lay out a global agenda. And I think this meeting that we're having here yesterday, today, and tomorrow is a hugely important opportunity, this Rio 2.0, to really think about what connection technologies, technology more generally, and innovation means for this big global agenda that's been around for a long time. It didn't start, obviously, in Rio 20 years ago. It started in Stockholm 40 years before that, bringing together political leaders to focus on this agenda. And so let me just offer four reasons that it's particularly important that we're here today. The first is, and it almost goes without saying, the enormous opportunities presented by technology. Technology is a game changer for this set of issues. Maura stole my line, but I looked back on the computer last night at some statistics to see what the world was like in 1992 as compared to today when leaders will be gathering. So back in 1992, you had 16 million internet users. Today, you have over 2 billion. Back in 1992, you had 4 cell phones per 100 people in the world. Today, you have 50 on average. This is just an absolutely dramatic transformation in the role that technology is playing in people's lives. And in the development world, what this really allows for is leapfrogging, taking societies or communities from isolation to access overnight. And that's been transformative for markets and for governments and for societies. And what I think that really means is that while progress is essential on the policy domain, and that's part of what the run-up to Rio is about, there's tremendous amount that can happen even in the absence of movement on policy. And I think that's part of the stories that we're going to hear today, both from folks who've worked inside government and those on the outside. The second point that I'd make is that the frontier is expanding on what is possible with technology. If technology in the early days was about communication and the flow of information, technology has begun to become even more fundamental for the relationship between governments and citizens. It's become more fundamental for the notion of innovation and open innovation. It's become more fundamental in creating a feedback loop, connecting citizens to government, government to citizens, and so forth. And as Jennifer Acker will talk about, it's becoming increasingly transformative today in the way in which technology can harness social networks and the way in which people are connected to one another. And then the third point that I'd make is that a lot of the exciting innovation, the ways in which technology is being used to change the game on questions of sustainable development is coming from developing countries themselves. And that's really what this panel is about. And we'll hear today from some of the leading thinkers, starting with Bitange Ndemo, the permanent secretary of the Ministry of ICT in Kenya, telling us the story about the development of technological infrastructure in Kenya and the really innovative ways in which Kenya is using open data and other innovative policies to promote software development to address their really pressing challenges. We'll hear from Ridwan Jamaluddin, the Deputy Director of Natural Resources Development, about the ways in which technology is being used to deal with the real and ever-present threats related to the climate and weather, disaster risk reduction in Indonesia. Indonesia really being at the forefront with models to share with countries around the world. And then we will end with Jennifer Acker, professor here at Stanford Business School, and her colleague, a student at Stanford who's been deeply involved in an effort that's really designed to harness the power of social networks to use technology to improve health outcomes around the world. And so with that, there are great stories to tell here, but also challenges that each of our terrific speakers has faced. And they'll tell us their stories, but then I hope we can also use some of the Q&A period to learn more about what's been difficult and how those obstacles have been overcome. So let's start with Bitange.
Okay, I think I need to use the... I am very delighted to join you this afternoon to talk about our experience in Kenya. As you've heard, my name is Bitange, Ndemo. I've been in government for about 5 years now, and we have done some work that I am happy that has been noted in other parts of the world. I will briefly talk about what we did I think 5 years ago. We decided that we needed to address the supply side of broadband. And after that, we began to address the demand side of broadband. And then we moved on to content and application development. And that is the story I want to tell you. But first, I wanted you to see this picture and probably know that it is true that where you see the many lines, there is greater development than probably you wouldn't see Africa. It's where there is no line. And anybody looking at this could actually conclude that there is a very high correlation between availability of broadband and development. And this is actually what drove us to trying to solve the issue of broadband in Africa. At the time, there was no link to Africa, especially East Africa, which never had the undersea cable. And we used a very unique method. Actually, the first public-private partnership was this undersea cable that linked Kenya and East Africa to the rest of the world. And then after what followed is that there was many other cables that came through. At the same time, we built, we've done about 20,000 kilometers of terrestrial fiber. And now we're using the same method to do the last mile, LTE, under a PPP framework. All this I'm saying here are on open access platform. What the open access platform does is that you get even new players to come in and force the price to come down. And we have moved in the past 3 years from the time the cables landed to now, we have lowered the costs of broadband from $3,500 per meg to less than $200 per meg. And the story, as it's been said, 3-4 years ago, we had only 3 million users, less than 5% of internet penetration in the country, to actually 40% now. And the mobile penetration from less than 20% to 70% now. So this has dramatically changed within a very short period of time. This is what we have in Africa now. We have several cables, and of course now we have much of what we needed, but we still have challenges in terms of the devices. We cannot finish the story of broadband without talking about devices that you have addressed. The cost of broadband, you must talk about the devices. This is Kenya, and how we have covered Kenya with the terrestrial fiber. And what you don't see here is that practically every corner would be having the last mile LTE network. What we are fighting now is how to get the devices that are cheap enough for every person to access broadband. I've argued several times that what you need is to provide access in order to create the Bill Gates or the Steve Jobs, and not the traditional way that we have looked at, because much of the innovations or inventions have not come, not through the PhDs, but the very brightest in our societies. And you practically look all over the world, there is that 5% which we have never reached, and that is what we want to reach and be able to get the kind of people who would be innovators or inventors. Mobile platforms have had huge transformations. And I think you've heard about M-Pesa. This is mobile money in Kenya, which has been very successful. As I speak to you today, 18 million Kenyans use this system to transfer funds. The funds transfer is actually now more than 20% of the GDP. We've had Ushahidi, and I think some of you know about it. This is a platform that was developed in Kenya that has been used in many areas of disaster, from Haiti to Chile, and today the APIs for Ushahidi are used all over the place. I wrote this ICAO because it's a good story that I wanted to tell you. That one day a young lady came to my office and said, I want you to come and launch a new app called iCow. I said, I've done crazy things, but not with cows. We launched it about 2 years ago, but what it has done, it has practically transformed those who have used this application. Most of you probably know, most African languages don't have the term productivity, and usually it's very difficult to explain productivity. Yet, that is what you must know in order to succeed in any enterprise. And with this application, they've been going around teaching farmers, asking them their objectives of buying a cow, and if they say milk, then they tell them, you have a wrong cow, because this one gives you 1 liter. You can get one which gives you 10 liters. And because of this, I just saw the statistics which I'm going to report here. Of those who registered with iCow, 97% are still with this application and getting information. Productivity has improved more than 60%, and they're continuing to work. We are going to see a lot more of these applications because on the area of agriculture, where there are so many applications coming up, these new applications came up because the government of Kenya released its data, and it became the first African country to have open data. And with this open data, we are now beginning to see applications that leverage on the already data that is available in terms of mapping of the soil, and farmers are being helped. Initially, we started with a program with Rockefeller, where the farmers would call in and talk about the disease of their crops. But now this is now being modified, where the farmer would just send an SMS through GPS. The expert would actually know where this farmer is, and because already the data is available, they are able to assist them what kind of crop you need to grow in order to make the maximum out of it. Because some farmers used to grow corn. Those who know about Africa, everybody grows corn, even where corn doesn't grow. Now we are beginning. And this would address actually about food security, because you are able to explain. And with that, I've written about commodities exchange and integrated healthcare. We would be able to help those farmers to link themselves with other farmers where they can be able to change. These are the 2 areas where we are doing many applications, and maybe next time we will be able to talk more, especially on the integrated healthcare management, where we are talking with various companies. And with this, we can lower the cost of health by as much as 50%. Because what is happening with healthcare, especially where I come from, is that we spend so much money on curative when we should spend more money on prevention, which is much cheaper. And actually, we can even use that resource to even buy them houses, especially prevention of malaria, for example, waterborne diseases. Testing of typhoid and malaria goes up to more than 10 billion Kenya shillings a year. You actually need 1% of that to do prevention. For us to be able to change this, we can, through use of this integrated healthcare, which we can explain once these apps are ready, we can be able to lower that. I need to show you the cow, of course. And this is, you can actually check this on internet and see some of the results. They're still on the platform. The benefits, the farmers' increased incomes, and there is so much out of this. But what I must say is that we have the real opportunity to transform, especially the developing world, where we have had so much problems, especially with food security. We have had disease. These are things practically every country in Africa that sought to eliminate about 50 years ago, but we still have them. Now we have the real opportunity to transform and actually move this forward. I would take 1 second and say that technology has come, and we are looking at technology, but sometimes the whole world tends to move one way and say, okay, let's try technology, whether it can solve the problems of Africa. But I want to say here that until such a point we address the issue of ethics, the value systems, even technology would be useless. Because this is where the crux of the matter is. I said earlier to the people I was talking that I think what we need to do is to talk to preachers and the priests how to change Africa, because this is where the problem is. Because these are the people who are going around promising people there is heaven. But if you know that heaven was supposed to be here, we were supposed to make earth, heaven on earth. People are listening to Jim Reeves, this world is not my home, so we can pollute it because we are moving on to another world, which is not there, by the way. So, we need to address things about here, because if you look at the Western world from Martin Luther, John Calvin, and most of the Puritans who moved to the US, they were looking at creating heaven on earth. And that makes the difference between some parts of the world and parts of the Western world. So if we are able to convince people that actually God said that heaven is what we make of in this world, we would create hope, and the people would use less coal or less look at renewable energy, because there is no other place we would call home other than Earth. Thank you.
Have to move it forward. Right. Forward is this one, right? I think. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's really an honor to me to be on this stage, and for that, I would like to thank the organizing committee, U.S. government, for giving me this opportunity. I would like to briefly share with you our experiences in developing the Indonesia tsunami early warning system, what we have been doing, the challenges, and the way forward we need to do with that. I believe this is relevant in talking about sustainable development in creating a safer environment. For those of you who are not familiar with Indonesia, geographically, Indonesia is comparable with the size of the United States. The only difference is that we have 2/3 of our country is ocean or water. And that is the boundaries of the 3 tectonic plates make it very active, and no wonder that Indonesia ranked #1 out of 265 countries, in which 2% of its population, or 5.4 million, are under tsunami threat. And if you know, the city of Padang is the most densely populated city in the world, according to the National Geographic, where the population is under tsunami threat. So, I'm sorry. After the earthquake and tsunami events in Aceh in 2004, the Earth is getting more dynamics or less stable. The earthquakes occur 10 times more frequently, and tsunami happen 3 times more frequently. On the other side, today's science and technology cannot predict exactly where and when the event will hit. So for that, the key technology is the detection technology. We just have to know when it has happened and then provide information to the community as soon as possible. Since 2005 or 2006, the government of Indonesia has committed to establish the tsunami early warning system. This system consisting of detecting instruments, including seismometer, buoy, tide gauges, a buoy, or sometimes we call it tsunamimeter, that function as a detecting instrument. On the other side is the communication technology or connection technology, where the information from the warning center is delivered to the community through local government. That's the SOP in Indonesia. Can imagine detecting instruments are good enough, but the problem is now on the information flow among the actors. It's still a big challenge, because can imagine if a tsunami happened in the middle of the night, somebody from Jakarta will have to call the head of district, and then they will have to push a button of the siren to wake up all the local community. So that's where the big challenge is now. Recently, more than 7,000 people, including scientists, government officials, police officers, volunteers, receive this tsunami information through their mobile phone. There have also been some information on TV, radios, but again, the problem now is that most of those who receive the information are not the right target groups, because local people, they don't have their mobile phone in their hand or in their pocket. So the problem now is that how to better distribute the technology to those who are actually in need of that technology. Other than that, there have been some technical and quote-unquote cultural challenges in the tsunami warning system. Technical and operational issues, including instruments breakdown, rough sea condition, which are not very difficult to overcome. It is more serious when we have to deal with cultural issues, when people or bad people likes to play with the instrumentation. We have a lot of experiences, well, not a lot, many experiences, where our buoys in the open sea have been dragged thousands of kilometers away from its original position. Can imagine we use a very big ship to deploy it, but they simply use the small fisherman boat and drags the buoy for 40 days. We could track the day down by GPS position, but again, it's very difficult. It's partly because of their ignorance. Maybe they don't know what the instrument is all about, so that that's not easy to overcome. Although we have done what we call the socialization before we deployed the instrument, but again, we deployed it in one location, but the fishermen came from different location. Another aspect I need to also mention in this forum, that in terms of innovation, somebody mentioned that not only private company innovate, government also innovates. There has been a lot of very effective technology transfer on our capabilities of developing the tsunami buoy in Indonesia. I have to thank the NOAA, the US government as a whole. We didn't know anything how to build a tsunami buoy when we had to make it. So in 2006, there has been a cooperation between Indonesian government and US government. So scientists and engineers at NOAA, specifically at PMEL in Seattle, told us how they built their buoys, and not long after that, a couple of months, 5, 6 months, we in Indonesia built our own buoy. I think this is a very good example on how innovation could work with open mind, I should say. The way forward with all those challenges, we are trying to develop better technology, so replacing the floating buoys with cable-based detection system, so we don't have to worry about somebody dragging the buoys off its original position. Second, we have been working with the community how to build the awareness, but I believe we have to do it more and more because Indonesia is such a big country, and those who live in tsunami vulnerable area are those who have not been well developed. So we really have to work on that, and for that local community development will only be successful with a clear national action plan and with support from the global community. And I believe that connection technology or info technology is an important among the important technologies to do so. Thank you very much.
My name is Jennifer Ocker. I teach here in the Graduate School of Business, and I wanted to tell you a story. I also wanted to introduce a couple of members in the audience, Vineet Singhal, who I'll refer to later in the presentation, Eric, another member of the student team, and Nathan Waterhouse of Open IDEO in the back, which is a platform for crowdsourcing creative solutions to very big problems. So the title of my story is The Perfect Match. It's a social media love story, and I wanted to tell you about a student. His name's Samir. His family's from Sindhi in India. Graduated here at Stanford several years ago, many years ago, and social entrepreneur. And so, like many of you, had small ideas that wanted to grow them, and was incredibly infectious and effective at growing those ideas. You can see a sense of Samir here. He had many friends, both in India as well as here in the Bay Area. A very colorful guy. He met and fell in love with a girl named Reena Bhatia, and he married her. And they were traveling in India about 3 years ago when he started to feel hot and feverish. He went to the hospital with Reena and was immediately diagnosed with leukemia and was shocked. Robert Chatwani was my student. His family's from Gujarat. I don't think I pronounced that correctly. But he was a Berkeley student, and when Samir was diagnosed with leukemia, he called Robert and told him the news, and Robert was also shocked. When he found out, he started reaching out to their friends and friends of friends and started learning many things about leukemia. I'm just going to share with you in silence some of the data about leukemia. One in 20,000. And Samir did not find the matches he desperately needed. 1 in 20,000 seems remote, seems implausible. And in India, a country with more than 1 billion people, where Samir would find a potential match, there is no national bone marrow registry. So Robert got friends and family together, and they knew they needed to do something. So Robert spent 3 hours right after he learned constructing an email. And in that simple message, he told the story of Samir. And he told the story of Samir so well, so compellingly, that anyone who got this message felt like they knew Samir or knew someone like Samir. And maybe more importantly, he crafted 3 calls to action. 1, get registered. It turns out, because of new technology, that it's extremely easy to get into the bone marrow registry. It's as simple as a cheek swab on your cheek, and you give that back in an envelope, you send it in, and you become part of the National Bone Marrow Registry. 2nd, spread the word. Take this message and share it with 10 people. Please tell those 10 people to share it with 10 people. And finally, to get involved, simply come to our website or Facebook page. And then they harnessed social media, and they took Facebook and Twitter and MySpace, and they harnessed tools of Google, and they spread that message. They built an instant brand, if you will. So within 24 hours, Samir had a website. And again, the call to action on that website was abundantly clear. Please go to this link to get registered into the Bone Marrow Registry, or come to one of the many local drives that you can see are right here. And they executed like crazy. What was so amazing about this effort, instead of talking to the doctors and saying, what can I do for Samir? And the doctor saying, there's nothing you can do for your best friend. In fact, the chances are 1 in 20,000. Instead of saying, that's a solution that I'll accept, that's a reality that I'll accept, Robert and his friends and family created a strategy, which we called the Dragonfly effect. And what they did was they harnessed both social media as well as traditional media, and they knew that awareness was incredibly important because with the case of many bone and blood cancers, the reality is that we often use preconceptions of how hard it is to actually give our bone marrow, but because of new technology, for the large majority of us who are lucky to match someone else and potentially give them our bone marrow, it's as simple as a 3-hour procedure, not dissimilar to actually giving blood. So they had to change people's preconceptions of how hard it is, and then they needed to drive action. Now, every one of these links are live. So if you double-click on the corporate drive, up comes a bone marrow's drive dummies guide. And every single link on this document is live. So if you double-click on the red text, up comes a letter that you can send your CEO at your corporation, and it outlines the story of Samir, what you need to do to help, because people want to help, they just don't know how. Now, if you double-click on that red text, up comes the letter that you shoot off to your CEO, and right after that is a thank you letter that you send to your CEO. Last Friday, we were able to run a bone marrow drive thanks to you. This is how many people we got into the bone marrow registry because of Friday's event. This is what we need to do next. Cut, paste, send. Because people want to help, and when they do help and they learn that their effect has been impactful, they want to help again. And yet rarely do we architect our campaigns so that they can do so. But if you provide tools and templates, effectively social change in a box, you're making it much easier for those of others that have common goals with you to help. And people created widgets and advertising campaigns, and they popped them onto their Facebook pages. People that didn't even know Samir, and they created video campaigns. Indian celebrities would create a call to action in 1 minute, pop it onto YouTube, and then spread it, compelling people to act and removing the misperceptions around bone marrow transfers. And the result in 11 weeks was 470 bone marrow drives, 24,611 South Asians were registered, all over the United States, populated in pockets where Indians live disproportionately, and a perfect match was found for Samir. Samir shared his story from the hospital because now he felt connected to 24,611 people that he didn't even know, and he blogged prolifically about how much he appreciated life and how much he appreciated this gift that he's been given. And he even put his bone marrow transplant onto YouTube so that people could see that the process of giving bone marrow or receiving bone marrow is not nearly as difficult as we often think. And the lessons they learned: 1, the power of a single focused goal. So rarely do we spend the time saying, what is our single focused goal? And yet, when we do articulate that, and that goal, the mere thought of achieving that goal brings people happiness, there's a resource that's unleashed in people. They act faster, more productive, more creative. They're sick less often when they are connected to a goal where the mere act of achieving that goal brings them happiness. The idea of reversing the rules, instead of listening to the doctors who say there's a 1 in 20,000 chance of finding a bone marrow match for your best friend, Robert and his friends and family said, what if we created a corporation? But instead of that corporation having a profit goal, we'll have that corporation have the single focus goal of getting 20,000 South Asians into the bone marrow registry within weeks. What would it look like to reverse the rules and do something that people traditionally don't even go to? And third, the ability to tell a story. Stories are those that connect on an emotional level. It's what pulls apart the context where people ask for your help and you want to step closer to them versus you step away. And maybe most importantly, how do you design for collaboration? How do you design it so that others can act? Because Robert knew that he wasn't able to, on his own, get 20,000 South Asians into the bone marrow registry. He had to design for others to act. What does it mean to look like a collaborative effort? So 4 simple goals. Single-focused goal, this idea of reversing the rules to grab people's attention in unexpected ways, the power to engage through stories, and this idea of enabling others to act, not necessarily yourself. As some of you in this room know, Samir, though, relapsed within 3 months of his transplant. He fought hard, but sadly passed on in March of 2008. And this is 2 days before he passed on. This is Rena and Samir. But the purpose of this story and why I'm here is that out of the 24,611 people that were registered, 266 people were matched with a subset of those people in 1 year alone. And as some of you know, the chances of survival increase up to 80% if you find a perfect match immediately, instead of something as low as 40% if you don't find a perfect match immediately. So the fact that 266 people matched means not just the gift of hope, but it's also the gift of time, and in that case, it means something very real. One story that takes your breath away can grow. And indeed, that story has inspired a group of Stanford students, not dissimilar to Samir, with a single focus goal. And in legacy of Samir and the life that he led, they chose last October to take the goal of trying to help get 100,000 people into the bone marrow registry, harnessing social networks to do so. As of last October, they helped to get more than 110,000 into the registry with the leadership of Vineet and other members in the room. And this is this is 100,000 Cheeks here at Stanford, in the medical school, in the business school, at the Haas Center here at Stanford. And their dream is to create social change in a box so that individuals who every day are diagnosed with leukemia or another bone or blood marrow cancer, just like Amit Gupta last December, only 2 months ago, when he was diagnosed and could not find a match, that they are able to now ignite Amit's social networks and help Amit's friends and family and doctors work toward finding a bone marrow match. And again, making it so easy through something as simple as a mobile technology, being able to educate people on what is needed, being able to allow them to connect with their own personal networks, being able for them to run their own drives and propose locations, and then be able to give them emails to send to their own friends and family, to recruit volunteers, and to advertise their event and teach people how to create videos and advertisements, and indeed find all of this downloadable. And then you harness your social network. One email, one story well told, sent by Robert only a couple of years ago, led to a book we call The Dragonfly Effect, which in turn led to students, 100,000 Cheeks, working with companies like OpenIDEO and do something to then create social change in a box, a tool that could be used in any type of format, not just health and cancer. And when amplified through LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and all of these mechanisms can reach over 1 million people. If you just think about what you do with your causes and the personal networks that you have, if you spent time creating tools and templates and asking them to spread, can you imagine what could happen just in the area of cancer, if not more broadly, and the number of lives that could be saved in the future? The end.
These are incredibly powerful stories from very, very different contexts, from very, very different sorts of problems, whether it's the extension of access to mobile communications, the challenge of preventing the scale of destruction and death that we saw in the aftermath of the tsunami, challenge of ensuring a bone marrow or a match for basic health problems. This is what's possible in this new world that we live in, and I think part of what this meeting is about is thinking about how we take advantage of technology and innovation and infect our thinking about Rio, our thinking about the challenges of sustainable development globally with all of this innovation and all of this excitement. With that, I want to open it up to questions. I'm sure they'll tell me when we need to stop, but I imagine you have questions not only about these great successes, but also the challenges that were encountered along the way.
Yeah, my name is Cliff Block. In an earlier era, I headed AID's efforts in communications for health and education and agriculture. And this is directed to Dr. Bitange Ndemo. By the way, first of all, congratulations. That's absolutely wonderful what you have achieved in such a short period of time. My question is this. What's ultimately needed, I'm sure you'll agree, is to really incorporate these new methodologies into the day-to-day work in the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture, et cetera. That's very often been a very difficult problem to deal with. So any commentary you have on that would be appreciated.
The biggest resistance comes from those who are supposed to implement. And almost on a daily basis, we find that it takes us a long time to explain and convince people, because people hold positions. For example, we've been trying to get books digitized so that we can distribute through the tablets to kids. But you find the book authors, the publishers, they're stuck to the very old models. And I think what business schools need to do is to come up with new models at this age, because they are fighting to sell 100,000 books and millions of kids without books, instead of actually selling $1 per book and sell to 1 billion kids. This is the new thinking, but you find it takes us so long to explain health. For example, we could do so much with diagnosis through e-health, but still you find we are stuck. But I'm sure this is the same phenomenon worldwide, and I think we need to discuss it more so that more people can understand that things change. The world is changing. And I don't know, but that is what I experience on a daily basis.
Ridwan, I wonder if you can speak to the same question as someone who's also addressing these challenges from inside government, the challenge of sort of locking in change and some of the obstacles you confronted.
In Indonesia, I believe the problem is more of the uneven distribution of the development. If you look at the data, when I showed the internet penetration, internet population is 16.5%. I believe most of those are concentrated in big cities. And also the data that 60% penetration of mobile phone, for example. In Indonesia, many people have more than one mobile phone. So again, it's about distribution and both comparing urban and village as well as Java and outside Java. So the government has also been in a very strong effort to try to build more infrastructures. I should also mention that the geographic challenge of Indonesia, as I mentioned, 2/3 of Indonesia is ocean, it's water. So to build the subsea fiber optic is a lot more difficult comparing to land-based fiber optic, for example. So those are most of the challenges in Indonesia.
Other questions from the audience? Gentleman over here.
Hi, I'm Anil Chaudhary from Bangladesh, Prime Minister's Office. We tried things that you are describing in Kenya from our Ministry of ICT, but what we found was that the influence of that ministry on other ministries was actually minuscule. So it was in pecking order, the ministry was not, maybe not at the very bottom, but in the probably bottommost 3. So what we had to do was to create a special unit within the Prime Minister's Office and do negotiations, policy advocacy, and also arm twisting in many cases to develop some of these same mechanisms. So I don't know, I would like to hear from you how you activated your ministry to do some of the very incredible things that you did. So that was one question. Another is, you seem to have done some remarkable public-private partnerships. All the examples that you talk about, the innovation came from the private sector, and somehow you sponsored or endorsed them through the government channels and scaled them up throughout the country, something that we have not been able to do. We have seen innovations happen within the government, remain within the government, and scaled up, but innovations from the private sector or NGOs have not been adopted by the government I guess, they have not been admired as such. Let me put it that way. So those 2 obstacles, how you overcame, that'd be very, it'd be good for me to know. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually wanted to speak about that. Thank you for asking this question. One of the strategies that I've used very effectively is to make sure that you go with everybody. The person you are seated next to is my chairman, parliamentary committee. I've got to be with him all over the world so that we agree on things that we are going to implement. And what we have done in Kenya is that our ministry has utilized social media, and in some of the mailing lists, we have up to 8,000 people. And we try to simplify things. Like now, the master plan we created 5 years ago was actually 7 pages, very simple, and everybody bought it. So you have an army that fights with you. And we did not rely on very traditional methods of funding, where you go to Treasury, then they say there is no money, then you sit there. That's why we looked for innovative financing methods to do major works, and with working with the people, this huge number of the mailing list that you have, which fights for you practically every corner, and support from Parliament, you find that you have the momentum that you need to move forward some of the projects that you are supporting. And because it took long for the private sector to trust the government, because that is where the problem is. If the private sector does not trust you, no matter what you do, it would not work. Now, if you come to Kenya, we work very closely with all the telcos. We work with the private sector because they have developed that trust. It takes a while, but you can get there. And then you drive the whole thing together. The ministry was, as you have said, one of the last ones, but I know right now, I don't know where we rank, but I think it's somewhere very high, where people would want and be able to work there. It's simply to work with the people closely and move with them. They understand what you're doing, and you begin to see this impacting practically everybody in the country.
Let's take one final question from the audience.
This is Chris Singh from IBM Research. Bitange, you mentioned about importance of ethics and values more than the technology in your talk. While that's true, but technology can go a long way to give people better quality of life, better education, better economic prosperity, and that will drive better ethics and values. Sometimes people who are not employed and struggling to survive, their definition of ethics and values could be different than somebody who is educated and have a better job. So my point was technology will go a long way to make the society much more sort of economically prosperous and provide better ethics and better values.
I think that it's a chicken and egg thing. If you put garbage into technology, you get garbage out. So you actually must begin with ethics, because as ethics goes very, very, very deep, you can actually lie with technology. Of course, technology helps, but it can't shape ethics. It can't shape value system. I don't know whether I'm alone on this, but it's key that we develop the value system that supports technology as we deploy it. Because what happens is that in some communities, ethics are not part of the gene within the culture. And some communities is part of it. Some communities, ethics came after the culture, so you have two compartments where when you are in church, ethics work, but when you walk out, it doesn't work. That's why I'm saying that we must ingrain that, even as we create the technologies, that you must have the culture and the ethics.
With that, I hope you will join me in thanking panelists who've come from near, but also those from far for today's session.
Thank you again.